The year was 1839, and the wide frontier of the American West stretched beneath an endless sky painted with soft shades of amber and blue. The wilderness was alive with distant bird song, restless horses, and the rhythmic clatter of wagon wheels traveling dusty trails. Small settlements had begun to grow along the expanding railway, bringing hopeful families, merchants, ranchers, and dreamers together in places where strangers often became neighbors. Yet even in such hopeful lands, disappointment could arrive without warning, leaving behind a silence louder than any storm. At the edge of one modest railway station stood a weathered wooden platform, its beams warmed by the fading sunlight. Travelers moved about with quiet purpose, lifting trunks, checking tickets, and exchanging cheerful farewells before boarding the evening train. Children chased one another around stacked barrels, while vendors packed away baskets of fresh bread and fruit for the night. The station carried its usual rhythm, but every passing glance eventually settled upon the same lonely figure seated on a worn wooden bench near the end of the platform. She wore a white bridal dress. Dust clung gently to the hem where it brushed the ground, and delicate lace sleeves had begun to wrinkle after hours beneath the afternoon sun. A small bouquet of pale wildflowers rested loosely in her trembling hands, their petals already beginning to curl. Her veil had slipped behind her shoulders, revealing chestnut hair carefully braided that morning for a celebration that had never taken place. Her name was Mirha. She was 29 years old. She had dreamed of becoming a wife for most of her life, believing that kindness, patience, and honest work would eventually lead her toward a peaceful home of her own. Instead, she now sat completely alone, surrounded by strangers who knew nothing about the quiet ache hidden behind her calm expression. Her eyes followed the railway tracks stretching toward the horizon until they disappeared into shimmering distance. Every few moments she seemed to gather enough courage to stand, only to lower herself onto the bench once again. There was nowhere she truly wished to go. She lowered her head and whispered so softly that even the evening breeze nearly carried the words away. "He rejected me. I have nowhere else to go." The confession was meant for no one. It was simply the truth finding its way into the open air. Nearby travelers heard only fragments of her voice. Some exchanged sympathetic looks before continuing on their journeys. Others avoided looking altogether, uncertain whether offering comfort would ease her pain or deepen it. In small frontier towns, news traveled quickly, but compassion often struggled to keep the same pace. The elderly station master, Mr. Calloway, had watched her since early afternoon. His silver beard and gentle eyes reflected years spent greeting arrivals and waving goodbye to departing trains. He believed every traveler carried a story, though some stories revealed themselves only through silence. As the station slowly emptied, he approached her with careful steps. "My dear," he said kindly, keeping a respectful distance, "the westbound train leaves soon. Are you waiting for someone?" Mirha lifted tired eyes toward him and offered a faint smile that held no bitterness. "No, sir. Another train, perhaps?" She slowly shook her head. "I don't believe anyone is coming." The old station master nodded without asking another question. Experience had taught him that sorrow unfolded in its own time. "I'll leave the bench just where it is," he replied gently. "Rest as long as you need." She thanked him with quiet sincerity. Even after everything that had happened, gratitude remained easier for her than complaint. As twilight deepened, memories returned one by one, not as loud accusations, but as gentle echoes she could not escape. She had lost both parents before reaching adulthood and had been raised by her widowed aunt in a small farming settlement several days from the railway. Life had never been easy, yet it had always been honest. While other young women attended dances or spoke excitedly about courtship, Mirha spent her days sewing dresses, mending shirts, and helping neighbors prepare blankets before winter arrived. Every careful stitch carried the same silent hope that one day she would build a family stitched together by kindness instead of wealth. Years passed, suitors came and went. Some wanted land, others wanted money. A few simply believed she had waited too long. Still, she refused to grow resentful. When a respected ranch owner named Edwin asked for her hand, she accepted with cautious hope rather than youthful excitement. Edwin had seemed thoughtful, hardworking, and gentle. More importantly, he had spoken of partnership instead of possessions. Preparations lasted several joyful weeks. Neighbors baked pies. Children gathered flowers. Her aunt carefully altered an old wedding gown until it fit perfectly, smiling through tears as each stitch transformed worn fabric into something beautiful again. On the wedding morning, sunlight poured through the little church windows while guests filled every wooden pew. Mirha stood quietly near the entrance, bouquet in hand, believing every difficult year had finally led to this moment. Then everything changed. Before the ceremony began, Edwin walked toward her with uncertainty clouding his face. He could barely meet her eyes. Behind him stood several well-dressed relatives whose expressions carried neither warmth nor welcome. One of them spoke first. "Our family has discussed this carefully," the older man announced. "This marriage cannot happen." Mirha stared silently. Edwin swallowed hard. "They believe," he began before his voice faltered. Another relative finished the sentence for him. "A woman without property, inheritance, or influential family connections cannot strengthen our future." The words settled heavily between them. Mirha looked only at Edwin. He had every chance to disagree, every chance to step forward, every chance to choose kindness over comfort. Instead, he lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Those two words ended everything. Mirha did not plead, she did not cry before the crowd. She simply handed her bouquet to a little girl standing nearby, thanked the pastor for his time, embraced her tearful aunt, and quietly walked away, still wearing the wedding dress prepared with so much love. By afternoon, she had reached the railway station with little more than the clothes she wore, and a small cloth satchel containing a sewing kit, a family Bible, and one carefully folded sketchbook filled with dress designs she had never shown anyone. Now the bouquet had somehow found its way back into her hands after the little girl chased after her outside the church, insisting a bride should never lose her flowers. Mirha gently brushed her fingertips across the fading petals. She did not know where tomorrow would lead. She only knew she had survived today. Far beyond the station, a solitary wagon rolled steadily along the dusty road toward the platform, its driver guiding two calm horses beneath the golden light of the setting sun, completely unaware that a single conversation before nightfall would quietly begin changing two lonely lives forever. The wagon came to a gentle stop beside the railway platform just as the last rays of sunlight painted the horizon with warm shades of gold. The horses lowered their heads, grateful for the rest after a long journey from the nearby valley. The man guiding them climbed down with steady confidence, brushing a thin layer of trail dust from his brown coat before greeting the station master with a friendly nod. His name was Josef. He was 33 years old, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with calm gray eyes that noticed small details other people often overlooked. Around the surrounding settlements, he was known less for his cattle than for his generous heart. He had returned lost horses without asking for payment, repaired broken wagons for strangers, and quietly left sacks of grain on struggling neighbors' porches whenever harsh seasons threatened their harvests. No one considered him wealthy, yet everyone agreed he possessed a richness that money could never purchase. After unloading several crates of supplies, Josef noticed the unusual silence hanging over one corner of the station. His eyes settled upon the woman dressed in white. She remained seated exactly where she had been for hours, holding a fading bouquet while the platform around her gradually emptied. Josef glanced toward Mr. Calloway. "Has someone been left behind?" he asked quietly. The station master sighed. "No," Josef waited. The old man continued. "She was supposed to become a bride today." Josef looked back toward Mirha. "And now?" "Now she says she has nowhere to go." Neither man spoke for several moments. Josef had learned long ago that every painful story deserved patience before questions. Instead of approaching immediately, he carried the final crate into the freight office, watered his horses, and thanked the station workers who had helped unload his wagon. Only after finishing every task did he slowly walk toward the lonely bench. He stopped several steps away. "May I sit here?" Mirha looked up, surprised by the courtesy. "Of course." Josef settled onto the opposite end of the bench, leaving enough space to respect her comfort. Neither hurried to fill the silence. The evening breeze drifted across the platform. A train whistle echoed faintly somewhere beyond the distant hills. Finally, Josef asked a single question. "Have you eaten today?" Mirha blinked. Of every question she had expected, that had not been one of them. She hesitated before answering honestly. "No." Without another word, Josef stood and walked toward the nearly closed station cafe. A few minutes later, he returned carrying fresh bread, roasted chicken, apples, and a steaming cup of tea. He handed them to her with a gentle smile. "I wasn't certain what you preferred." For a moment, Mirha could not speak. The kindness felt almost unfamiliar after the cruelty she had experienced that morning. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't owe me thanks for supper." She carefully broke a small piece of bread. "I've been thanking everyone today." Josef nodded thoughtfully. "I noticed." She looked at him with quiet curiosity. "You did. The station master, the porter, the woman who offered you water. You thanked each of them." Mirha lowered her eyes. "They were kind. So were you." She looked puzzled. "I don't understand." Josef leaned back against the bench. "Most people become angry after being treated unfairly. You became grateful whenever someone showed you even a little kindness." Mirha stared at the untouched tea resting between her hands. "My parents taught me that bitterness grows faster than weeds." "And your parents were wise." The words carried no pity, only respect. For the first time since leaving the church, Mirha felt someone was seeing more than her wedding dress. He was seeing her. After finishing her meal, she quietly explained what had happened. Not every detail, only enough. She spoke about losing her parents, living with her aunt, sewing dresses, and believing she had finally found a peaceful future. She described the church, the relatives, Edwin's silence, and the painful walk away from everything she had hoped would become her new life. Josef listened without interrupting. When she finished, he remained silent for several moments. Then he asked softly, "If you could leave tonight, where would you go?" Mirha looked toward the endless tracks disappearing into darkness. "I honestly don't know. Do you have family elsewhere?" "No, friends." She slowly shook her head. "I've always stayed where I was needed." Josef folded his hands thoughtfully. "I know a place where you'd be needed." She smiled sadly. "I think you're trying to comfort me." "I'm trying to answer your question." She looked confused. "What question?" "Nowhere else to go?" Her heart skipped. Those had been the exact words she had whispered earlier. "You heard me?" "I did." Embarrassment briefly colored her face. "I'm sorry. There's nothing to apologize for." He stood and looked toward his waiting wagon. "I have a ranch about 2 hours from here." Mirha immediately became cautious. "I appreciate your kindness, but I couldn't possibly impose." "You wouldn't. I don't even know you." "That's true." She waited. Josef turned back toward her. "My father taught me something before he passed away." He paused. He said a lonely house stays empty because people keep waiting for perfect circumstances instead of opening the door. Mirha listened quietly. "I've spent years helping neighbors build families." He smiled faintly. "I somehow forgot to build one myself." She wasn't certain where the conversation was leading. Then Josef spoke the words that changed everything. "You're coming with me." Mirha stared at him in complete disbelief. "I'm sorry. I need a wife like you." The world seemed to stop. Even the breeze felt suddenly still. Surely she had misunderstood. "You can't mean that." "I do. You've only known me for half an hour. I've watched you longer than that." She searched his face for signs of mockery. There were none. "I don't understand." Josef remained calm. "I don't need someone wealthy. I don't need someone famous. I don't need someone with land." He looked directly into her eyes. "I need someone whose first instinct is kindness." Mirha felt tears threatening once again. "You don't even know whether I'd make a good wife. I know you thanked strangers while carrying your own heartbreak." He continued gently. "I know you protected the man who hurt you by speaking without bitterness. I know you ate slowly because you were grateful for simple bread. I know you smiled at the station master's granddaughter even while your own heart was breaking." He took one careful step closer. "Character reveals itself in ordinary moments." She struggled to answer. "This isn't how proposals happen." "No, it isn't. I've never imagined proposing beside a railway platform." A small laugh escaped Mirha despite herself. Josef smiled too. "There it is." "What?" "Your smile." She quickly looked away. "It doesn't belong to me yet." "I wasn't asking you to marry me tonight." She looked back at him. "I wasn't." "No, I'm asking you to come somewhere safe. My guest room is yours for as long as you wish. If after weeks or months you decide you never want to see me again, I'll drive you anywhere you choose. And if I stay, then perhaps we'll spend more time learning who we truly are." Mirha searched his expression once more. Everything about him felt sincere. Not hurried, not desperate, simply honest. "Why would you trust someone you've only just met?" Josef looked toward the quiet prairie stretching beneath the evening sky. "Because someone once trusted me when I had nothing." He never explained further. He didn't need to. His answer carried the weight of experience. The station master approached with 2 neatly folded blankets. "I thought you might need these," he said warmly. Joseph accepted them with gratitude. "Thank you." Mr. Calloway smiled at Mirha. "I believe the Lord sometimes sends trains." He glanced toward Joseph's wagon, and sometimes he sends wagons. The old man quietly walked away before either could respond. Mirha remained seated for another long moment. Everything familiar had disappeared. Everything ahead was uncertain, yet uncertainty offered something her past no longer could: hope. She carefully stood, gathered her small satchel, lifted the fading bouquet, and looked toward Joseph. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring." "Neither do I," he answered. She drew one slow breath. "But I'd rather face tomorrow with kindness than fear." Joseph offered his hand, not to claim her, but simply to help her climb into the wagon. She accepted it. As the horses began their steady journey beneath the glowing evening sky, neither of them realized that the impossible proposal made beside a forgotten railway station would become the quiet beginning of the home both had spent years searching for without ever knowing the other's name. The journey from the railway station to Joseph's ranch took less than 2 hours, yet for Mirha it felt like traveling from one life into another. The wagon rolled steadily across open grasslands where wildflowers swayed gently beneath the evening breeze. Herds of horses grazed peacefully in distant meadows, and scattered cottonwood trees stretched long shadows across the prairie as the last glow of sunset slowly faded into a sky filled with countless stars. Neither Joseph nor Mirha hurried the conversation. Silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Whenever the wagon reached a rough patch in the trail, Joseph slowed the horses to make the ride easier for her. Small gestures like that spoke more clearly than grand promises ever could. When they finally reached the ranch, Mirha expected something impressive. Instead, she found something better. A modest white farmhouse stood beside a weathered red barn surrounded by sturdy wooden fences and flowering gardens carefully tended with obvious love. Chickens wandered freely across the yard, while several gentle horses lifted their heads in quiet curiosity as the wagon approached. A lantern glowed warmly beside the front porch, making the entire home feel welcoming long before anyone opened the door. An elderly woman stepped outside carrying an apron still dusted with flour. She smiled the moment she saw Joseph. "You've finally returned." Then her eyes settled on Mirha. Without surprise or judgment, she simply asked, "And who is our guest?" Joseph answered honestly, "Her name is Mirha." The elderly woman nodded warmly. "Then welcome home, Mirha." Those two simple words touched Mirha more deeply than anyone could have imagined: welcome home. No one had spoken those words to her in years. The housekeeper introduced herself as Mrs. Elena Brooks, a widow who had worked beside Joseph's family since he was a boy. She prepared a warm supper, showed Mirha a comfortable guest room overlooking the fields, and insisted that no questions needed answering until morning. That night, Mirha slept more peacefully than she expected. For the first time since the wedding, she did not dream about rejection. She dreamed about sunlight crossing endless fields. The following weeks settled into a gentle rhythm. Joseph rose before dawn to care for the horses, repair wagons, and oversee the ranch. Mirha gradually began helping wherever she could, refusing to remain idle while others worked around her. She baked fresh bread with Mrs. Brooks. She organized the pantry. She planted herbs beside the kitchen window. Most of all, she found herself drawn toward the stable, where injured horses recovered under Joseph's patient care. Watching him gently soothe frightened animals revealed another side of his character. He never raised his voice. He never hurried frightened creatures. He simply waited until trust replaced fear. One afternoon, Joseph discovered Mirha sketching quietly beneath an old oak tree. He noticed elegant dress designs filling page after page. "You drew these?" She closed the sketchbook quickly. "They're only ideas." "They're beautiful. I've never shown anyone. Why not?" She smiled shyly. Life always seemed to need practical things before beautiful ones. Joseph considered her words carefully. The two don't have to compete. The following Saturday, he drove into the nearby settlement carrying one of her finished dresses without telling her. By evening, every piece had been sold. Several women immediately requested custom gowns. When Joseph returned, he placed a small cloth pouch filled with coins onto the kitchen table. Mirha looked confused. "What is this?" "The beginning." She opened the pouch slowly. "I can't accept this. You earned it." She stared at the coins. "No one has ever paid me fairly for my sewing. They will now." Word spread quickly throughout neighboring ranches about the talented seamstress living at Joseph's farm. Families traveled from miles away seeking dresses for birthdays, celebrations, and church gatherings. Children laughed while choosing colorful ribbons, mothers admired Mirha's careful stitching, and older women praised the elegance of her simple designs. Little by little, the woman who had arrived carrying only heartbreak began creating beauty once again. Months passed gently. Neither Josef nor Mirha spoke about marriage. There was no pressure, no expectation, only growing friendship. They shared quiet breakfasts before sunrise. They repaired saddles together. They watched sunsets from the porch while Mrs. Brooks hummed old frontier songs inside the kitchen. One autumn afternoon, an elegant carriage unexpectedly arrived at the ranch. A well-dressed older woman stepped down alone. Mirha recognized her immediately. She was Edwin's mother. For a brief moment, painful memories threatened to return. Josef quietly approached. "If you'd rather not speak with her, I'll ask her to leave." Mirha looked toward the woman waiting nervously beside the gate. Then she gently shook her head. "No, I think she's carried something heavy too." The older woman slowly walked forward. Tears already shimmered in her eyes. "I've prayed for this meeting," she whispered. Mirha remained silent. "I wanted that wedding to happen." Her voice trembled. "But when my husband and brothers demanded it be stopped, I remained quiet." She lowered her head in shame. "My silence hurt you almost as much as their words." For several long moments, neither woman spoke. Finally, Mirha stepped closer. "You cannot change yesterday. I know, but I hoped you might someday forgive me." Mirha looked toward the fields where sunlight danced across tall grass. "I spent many nights wondering why everything happened." She smiled gently. "If it hadn't happened, I would never have found this place." The older woman's tears fell freely. "You forgive me?" "I do." Not because the pain had disappeared, but because carrying resentment would only steal tomorrow's peace. Josef watched quietly from the porch. In that moment, he understood something profound. Mirha's greatest strength was not surviving rejection. It was choosing compassion afterward. That evening, after the visitor departed, Josef found Mirha sitting beneath the same oak tree where she often sketched. He carried 2 cups of warm tea. "You amazed me today." She accepted the cup. "I simply let go. Many people never do." She looked toward the setting sun. "I almost believed being rejected meant I wasn't worthy of love." Josef shook his head. "It only meant the wrong person failed to recognize your worth." Silence settled comfortably between them. Finally, Josef spoke. "The day I met you at the station, I said I needed a wife like you." She smiled. "I remember. I wasn't asking because you had nowhere to go." He took a slow breath. "I was asking because I hoped someday you might choose to stay." He reached into his pocket and removed a simple silver ring. No expensive jewels, only careful craftsmanship. "I've had months to know your heart. You've filled this house with warmth. You've brought laughter back to rooms that had forgotten it. You've reminded me that home isn't built from timber. It's built from people." He looked gently into her eyes. "Mirha, will you become my wife?" Tears filled her eyes once again, but these were entirely different from those shed at the railway station. These carried joy, not sorrow. She smiled through them. "When you first met me, I believed no one would ever choose me." Josef softly answered, "I chose you before you ever believed you deserved to be chosen." Mirha slipped the ring onto her finger. "Then my answer is yes." Several weeks later, neighbors gathered beneath towering cottonwood trees for a simple wedding filled with laughter, music, and heartfelt blessings. Mirha wore a graceful gown she had designed herself, while Josef waited with unmistakable happiness shining across his face. After the ceremony, the elderly station master arrived carrying the dried bouquet she had once clutched in despair. Hidden beneath its ribbon rested a folded note Josef had written on the evening they first met. It read, "Some people search for perfection. I only searched for a kind heart. The moment you thanked strangers while carrying your own sorrow, I knew I had found the person who could make any house a home." Years later, whenever lonely travelers paused near that same railway station, Mirha greeted them with warm bread, gentle words, and open kindness, proving that rejection had never been the end of her story. It had simply been the quiet beginning of the beautiful home she never expected, yet always deserved.